Stop
Your Honor,
scrolling,
this evidence is
because what
crucial
you're
to our
about to hear
case.
will flip
I'll allow
everything
it.
you think you
Proceed.
know about power,
Thank you.
prejudice, and justice in America. And if you believe stories can still shock you, teach you, and leave you breathless, hit subscribe right now so you don't miss the ones they don't want you to hear. Because this is the story of the day a courtroom laughed at a black teen and then froze in silence when the truth walked in, wearing a borrowed suit and a mind sharper than any gavel. A day that began like so many others in the old county courthouse with its cracked marble floors and faded flags, where 16-year-old Marcus Bell stood at the defense table in a jacket 2 sizes too big, hands folded the way his mother taught him, eyes calm but alert, while whispers rippled through the gallery like gnats on a hot day. The kind of whispers that come when people think they already know your story before you open your mouth. And up on the bench sat Judge Harold Whitman, a man whose reputation preceded him like a shadow at noon. Silver hair slicked back, smile tight and knowing. The kind of smile that had made grown attorneys feel small. And when he peered down at Marcus over his glasses, he let out a short laugh. Not loud, just enough to sting, just enough for the courtroom to hear, and said, "Well now, this is what passes for a defense these days?" Which drew a few nervous chuckles from the benches, because everyone could see what he saw, or thought he saw, a black teenager from the east side accused of hacking into a municipal database and redirecting traffic fines, a crime the local paper had already labeled as street-smart cyber mischief. And Marcus's public defender hadn't shown up yet, stuck in traffic or stuck in apathy, no one knew which, and the judge leaned back, tapping his pen, asking Marcus if he understood the seriousness of the charges, talking slow like Marcus might not understand English, like the words needed to be chewed before they could be swallowed. And Marcus answered politely, clearly, saying, "Yes, Your Honor." And that seemed to amuse the judge even more, because he smirked and said, "You planning on representing yourself, son?" And when Marcus said, "Yes, Your Honor," the laughter came louder this time. A bailiff snorted. A clerk looked down to hide a smile, and Judge Whitman waved his hand like he was shooing a fly, telling Marcus this wasn't a TV show, that real court required real lawyers, and Marcus nodded, respectful, and said, "I understand, sir, but I am a real lawyer." And that's when the judge laughed outright, a booming laugh that echoed off the stone walls, saying, "Of course you are," and asking where Marcus got his law degree, from the internet maybe, and Marcus calmly replied, "From Columbia Law School." And that should have stopped the room cold, but it didn't, because prejudice is louder than truth when it thinks it's safe. And the judge scoffed, saying, "Let me guess, you graduated last week?" And Marcus said, "No, sir. I graduated 2 years ago." And the judge shook his head, saying this was enough nonsense, that he'd appoint standby counsel and move things along. But then Marcus reached into his folder and placed a document on the table, sliding it forward with steady hands, and said, "Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to enter my appearance." And the clerk hesitated, unsure, looking up at the judge, who rolled his eyes and nodded dismissively. And the clerk took the paper, her eyes scanning it, then scanning it again, her smile fading, her posture changing, and she looked up slowly at the judge and said, "Judge Whitman, this appears to be valid." And that's when the laughter died, not all at once, but in pieces, like lights going out down a hallway, because the document was real, the bar number checked out, the name matched, Marcus Bell, admitted to the bar at 18 after a special petition, the youngest in state history. And the judge leaned forward, frowning now, asking the clerk to bring it up, and he read it himself, his jaw tightening, the smirk gone, replaced by something like irritation mixed with disbelief. And he asked Marcus why he was in juvenile court if he was a licensed attorney, and Marcus said, "Because the state charged me as a minor before verifying my credentials, and because I knew this courtroom would never believe me unless I stood right here." And that answer hung in the air heavy as humidity, because it wasn't just about credentials anymore, it was about assumptions. And the prosecutor, a polished man named Randall Cope, cleared his throat and objected, saying this was highly irregular, that regardless of Marcus's bar status, he was still the defendant. And Marcus nodded and said, "That is correct, counselor, which is why I will now be representing myself." And Judge Whitman's face hardened, pride bruised, and he said he'd allow it, but warned Marcus that courtroom theatrics wouldn't be tolerated. And Marcus smiled politely and said, "I wouldn't dream of it." And as the hearing moved forward, something strange happened, something no one in that room expected, because Marcus didn't argue like a kid trying to sound smart. He argued like someone who had lived inside the law, citing precedent without notes, correcting the prosecutor gently but firmly, pointing out procedural errors in the arrest, chain of custody, gaps in the digital evidence. And as he spoke, the gallery leaned forward, the judge sat up straighter, and the prosecutor began to sweat. Because Marcus wasn't just defending himself. He was teaching a masterclass, explaining how the municipal database had been breached months before by a private contractor, how Marcus had accessed it legally during a city-sponsored coding competition, how the logs the prosecution relied on were misinterpreted, and how the state's own expert had misunderstood the encryption protocol. And when Marcus asked to call that expert to the stand, Judge Whitman hesitated, then allowed it, and Marcus cross-examined the man with surgical precision, walking him step by step into admitting he'd never actually verified the breach source that he'd assumed, and that assumption now echoed the one the judge himself had made earlier that morning. And the room felt it, the shift, the discomfort, the realization. And when Marcus rested his case, he asked for dismissal, with prejudice, citing lack of probable cause. And Judge Whitman called a recess, something he rarely did mid-hearing, retreating to chambers with a stiff walk. And during that break, whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into buzz. Because word spreads fast when a narrative cracks. And by the time the judge returned, his tone had changed, not warm, but careful. And he granted the motion, dismissing all charges, and said the court was adjourned. But before Marcus could gather his things, the judge cleared his throat and addressed him directly, saying, "Mr. Bell, you have an unusual background." And Marcus nodded. And the judge continued, saying, "The court may have underestimated you." And that was as close to an apology as that man had ever come, and Marcus accepted it with grace, thanking the court. But the story didn't end there, because outside the courthouse, cameras waited, reporters shouting questions, and Marcus stood beside his mother, who had arrived late, breathless, fear still in her eyes. And when asked how a black teen became a licensed attorney before most people finished high school, Marcus told them about nights studying while his friends slept, about mentors who saw potential instead of stereotypes, about a system that wasn't built for him, but that he learned anyway, and the clip went viral. Millions watching Judge Whitman's earlier laughter juxtaposed with Marcus's calm brilliance, and pressure mounted. Investigations followed, old rulings re-examined, patterns questioned, and within months, Judge Whitman announced his retirement, citing health reasons, while Marcus was offered internships, fellowships, platforms. But he chose something else, something quieter and louder at the same time, opening a nonprofit legal clinic for juveniles wrongly charged, kids who walked into courtrooms already convicted by the way they looked. And years later, when Marcus returned to that same courthouse, not as a defendant but as counsel in a landmark civil rights case, people remembered the day they laughed, the day they learned, the day the room went silent. Because justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it wears an oversized jacket and carries a truth so sharp it cuts through every bias in the room. And if that kind of story matters to you, if you believe moments like this deserve to be told and retold, don't forget to subscribe, because this was just one case, and there are many more waiting to be heard.